Joseph Beyrle is the only known American soldier to have served in combat with both the United States Army and the Soviet Red Army during the Second World War. Beyrle was the third of 7 children born to William and Elizabeth Beyrle, whose parents had come to the United States from Germany in the 1800s. Upon his enlistment in the US military in 1942, Beyrle volunteered to become a paratrooper, and after completing basic airborne infantry training, he was assigned to the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division. Beyrle specialised in radio communications and demolition and was first stationed in Ramsbury, England, to prepare for the upcoming Allied invasion of France. On the 6th of June 1944, Beyrle was one of a number of paratroopers who looked to jump into Normandy. His C-47 came under heavy fire over the Normandy coast, and he was forced to jump from the altitude of 360 feet. After landing near Saint-Côme-du-Mont, Sergeant Beyrle lost contact with his fellow paratroopers, but succeeded in blowing up a power station. He performed other sabotage operations before eventually being captured by German soldiers a few days later. Over the course of the next 7 months, Beyrle was held in 7 German prisons. He escaped twice and was both times recaptured. During his escape attempts, he, along with his fellow prisoners, had been hoping to find the Red Army, which was a short distance away. Following the second escape attempt, in which he and his companions set out for Poland, but mistakenly boarded a train to Berlin, Beyrle was turned over to the Gestapo by a German civilian. Beaten and tortured, he was released into the custody of the German military after officials stepped in and determined that the Gestapo had no jurisdiction over prisoners of war. The Gestapo were about to shoot Beyrle and his comrades, claiming that he was an American spy who had parachuted into Berlin. In military custody, Beyrle was taken to Stalag 3C, a prisoner of war camp from which he escaped in early January 1945. Heading east, he hoped to meet up with elements of the Soviet Red Army. Encountering a Soviet tank brigade in the middle of January, he raised his hands holding a pack of Lucky Strike cigarettes and shouted in Russian, "American comrade." He was eventually able to persuade the battalion's commander, Alexandra Samosenko, who was reportedly the only female tank officer of that rank in the war, to allow him to fight alongside the unit on its way to Berlin. Thereafter, Beyrle began a month-long stint in the Soviet tank battalion, where his demolitions expertise were appreciated. Towards the end of January, the Soviet tank battalion freed Stalag 3C. During the first week of February, Beyrle was wounded during an attack by German dive bombers. Evacuated to a Soviet hospital in Landsberg, where he received a visit from the Soviet Marshal Grigory Zhukov, who, intrigued by the only non-Soviet in the hospital, learned his story through an interpreter and provided Beyrle with official papers in order to rejoin American forces. Joining a Soviet military convoy, Beyrle arrived at the US Embassy in Moscow in February 1945, only to learn that he had been reported by the US War Department as having been killed in action on the 10th of June 1944. Indeed, a funeral mass had been held in his honour, and his obituary was published in the local newspaper. Embassy officers in Moscow, unsure of his bona fides, placed him under Marine Guard in the Metropole Hotel until his identity had been established through fingerprints. Beyrle was returned home to Michigan on the 21st of April 1945 and celebrated VE Day 2 weeks later in Chicago. Following his return to the United States, he worked for the Brunswick Corporation for 28 years before retiring as a shipping supervisor. His unique service earned him medals from US President Bill Clinton and Russian President Boris Yeltsin at a ceremony in the Rose Garden of the White House marking the 50th anniversary of D-Day in 1994. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more updates, like and share. You can also help to support the channel at Patreon. Details are in the description box below.